Hello, this is Derek Abrams, and this is my final project presentation. What we have here is my class website that I have created through Blackboard. We have all of our links. We have a welcome page, announcements, calendar, syllabus, contact information. So important links are here on the left. And then as you go through and click on them, if you want the contact information, there's my contact. And so what I do is I have my website listed out by units. And so here I have first semester, second semester. And for this intended project, we were going to be in Unit 9. And Unit 9 is going to be over solving quadratic equations. So for this final project, I will be having a lesson that deals with solving quadratic equations by the quadratic formula. If you can see here with my cursor, we are going to be actually looking at day 4, February 21st, and these are all my links for my project. All right, so before I show the links, I just want to give some information. The grade level that I teach is 9th grade, Algebra 1. The standards that I'll be focused on with this unit or this lesson is going to be solve quadratic equations by inspection, taking square roots, factoring, completing the square, and the quadratic formula. As appropriate to the initial form of the equation, limit to real number solutions. So we're going to be solving quadratic equations by 4 different methods. This unit, this lesson right here, day 4 is focused on the quadratic formula. So the lesson objective for today's lesson, the lesson objective will be that students will learn how to solve a quadratic equation by using the quadratic formula. So the plan of assessment, and I'll talk a little bit more once we get to it, but we're going to have a ticket out the door, which is going to be a quick 2-question quiz that I do through Blackboard, and that's going to kind of let me see what my students understood from the lesson and let them have an understanding of how well they learned the lesson. But the big thing is, and you can see in my calendar, how my students are going to be assessed is through a mini quiz, a regular quiz, and eventually down by Unit 9 test. So those are that's the plan of assessment. Now, remediation plan. So what it is after the ticket out the door and I look over those, I'll be able to determine how well my students understand the content, and so where I could go the next day, be able to go over warm-ups and reiterate that lesson, which was B quadratic formula. Also, what happens is after the first mini quiz, I'll be able to see where my students are for all of the quadratics equation methods, and then I can assign through Delta Math, which is what I'll be using for the homework. I can assign additional Delta Math problems that just focus on the standards that the students didn't master. So that's kind of have the plan of remediation, and then also I have a remediation for anyone who fails my unit test. If they get below a 70 and fail it, they can take a retake and get up to a 70 on a remediation test. But that would be, of course, over all of the standards. But for the standard that we're focused on here with the quadratic formula, I would use Delta Math to help reiterate that if students struggle. So how my lesson would go is basically down the links. Is that I would start the class with the warm-up, and then as they're coming in and they're pulling up the warm-up, this link right here is going to pull up their warm-up, and then the warm-up will be a Word document like this. They're able to download it, and then what they can do is they can have 2 options. They can work on a separate sheet of paper, the warm-up, and put it in their binder for later, for the future to where they could look back over. Or they could use their Chromebooks, which they have pulled up, and they can write on their Chromebooks because it's touchscreen. And then they can actually fill in the warm-up digitally, and then they could save that copy and be able to look back at it on their computer. So that would be warm-ups are definitely something where I use to reiterate the previous day's lesson. And then while the students are working on their warm-up, I'd be walking around checking their homework. But the warm-up online through that Word document is a great tool to where they can save it and be more organized through having a folder set up on their laptop instead of always having a piece of paper. So how the lesson would go is I have a video lesson so which they could click on here. So here would be, say, an example of the video. If I go back, I have the notes and the guided notes, a link as well. So what it is the notes I would provide for my students in class, but if I have students that are sick and aren't able to come to school, that they can pull up the notes themselves, print them out, and then watch the video at home so they could stay on pace with the class even if they're not at school. But the great thing about the video lessons is that they can click play and then they can watch it at their own pace. They can stop it, write down notes, they can play it again, they can fast forward, they can rewind. It's just a great tool for them to be able to go at their own pace instead of me standing up at the board and then everyone goes at the same pace. So that's why I like the video lessons. And then another great tool about the video lessons is that they are always on my website. So any student that's home or that can't come to school, they can always stay with the lesson and be with my students. And then also if they're studying for a quiz, like later that night, if they to go ready for that mini quiz, they could rewatch the lesson. So it's always up for them to access. Now, after the notes, the students will fully fill in the notes. They will move on to the classwork, which is going to be a quizzes, which is a game type setting where they have multiple choice questions and the students would click on the link, they click on the solo game, and they would pick a meme and they would start the game. And then as the game goes, it would actually time them and then they would work the problems out. And then here they would pick the different answers, work it out, that would be incorrect, and then they get immediate feedback if they were right or wrong. All right. So let me exit out and then go back. But that is just a great way to give my students practice without just having to give them a worksheet, and it's more interactive, and it's a game type atmosphere, so they're competitive and they want to try to beat their other friends, so they try to do the best they can. It's just a good way to have my students practice the math in a more interactive and engaging way. Now, after the classwork, this would be more towards the end of the class, my students would then, I would open up, first I would have to open it up, and then I would allow them to pull up the ticket out the door. Now, the purpose of the ticket out the door is to kind of give them a way to be able to kind of take a quiz type atmosphere with no notes, nothing, and then on their own see if they really understood the material. And then so it's just a 2-question little quiz through Blackboard. I set up this ticket out the door through Blackboard, and then you may begin. And what happens is they just go through, they see the question, solve quadratic by the quadratic formula. They would do their work on a separate sheet of paper. They can't do it, it's kind of hard on here math-wise to do the work on the computer. So they do it on a separate sheet of paper, fill in the answers, and then they would submit it. And then after they submit everything, they would get feedback, they would get the correct answer, and then I will go in later on and look at their work to see what answers they were getting, to see how well my students were able to learn the quadratic formula. So that's kind of like at the end of class, and then before my students would leave, I would make sure to remind them that their homework is also up here. It's going to be through Delta Math, and the homework here is Delta Math is a great tool, gives my students lots of practice, and it's set up to where it's standards based. So if there's a certain standard I'm looking at, like here, quadratic formulas, I can assign an assignment based off that standard. A great thing is you can show an example. So if my students get stuck at home and they need more examples besides the notes that they had in class, they can pull this up and follow the steps and then help them also through this. And then what I would do is I'd make sure to tell my students now, you're submitting your answers on here, but you need to make sure you're writing on a separate sheet of paper to show your work that you're actually completing these and not just randomly clicking on them. And I would check the next day if they actually had that work shown. But no, this is how I set up my classroom. This calendar has every day set up perfectly to where my students, if they miss that day, all the links are there on that page. But yes, so that is my final project. That is it.